I used to believe life rewarded the ones who kept their heads down and worked hard. I built everything I had on that belief. The late nights, the early mornings, the weekends spent catching up when everyone else was out living their lives. I didn't complain, I didn't question it. I thought if I was loyal to my job, loyal to my wife, loyal to the future we promised each other, everything would fall into place. Her name was Emily. We met in college, two kids too broke to go out on real dates, surviving off late-night pizza and shared dreams. I proposed to her with a ring I bought after saving every spare dime for a year. She cried when she said yes. I thought we were the lucky ones. Fast forward 10 years, and I was the kind of man people call steady. I showed up, I kept my promises. I thought that would be enough. It wasn't. The day everything fell apart started like any other. I went into work, grabbed my coffee, nodded to the receptionist, and buried myself in the endless paperwork my boss, Grant Morris, loved to pile onto me. Grant, the kind of man who oozed charm when he needed something from you, but behind closed doors, he could be brutal. I didn't care. I wasn't there to make friends. I was there to earn. Looking back, I can't believe how blind I was. The signs were there. Emily had started pulling away months before it all came out. She was quieter, tired all the time. She had excuses ready: work stress, family troubles, not feeling well. I bought every single one. Because the alternative, that she didn't love me anymore, wasn't something I could even imagine. Then one afternoon, I was called into Grant's office. I expected another ridiculous deadline or some last-minute demand. Instead, he smiled, that cold, empty smile I would grow to despise, and said he had some concerns about my performance. He slid a manila folder across the desk. Inside were pictures, grainy, blurred, but unmistakable. Emily, him, together, too close. I remember staring at the photos, not even feeling my own body, like my mind had separated from me. I looked up at him and he laughed. Actually laughed. "I always get what I want," he said casually, as if he was talking about closing a deal, not destroying a man's life. I got up and left. I didn't remember walking out. I didn't remember driving home. I just remember the hollow roar in my ears and the shaking in my hands that wouldn't stop. Emily wasn't home when I got there. I sat in the dark, waiting for her, running through every possible explanation that could undo what I had seen. By the time she walked through the door, I had nothing left but questions that tasted like blood in my mouth. At first, she denied it. Then, when I showed her the pictures, she crumpled. She cried, begged, tried to explain. She said it wasn't what I thought, that he had pressured her, blackmailed her, threatened to fire me if she didn't give in, that it had started with one mistake she couldn't take back, and then he trapped her with it, holding it over her like a noose. I wanted to believe her. I did. But part of me, the part she killed, whispered that somewhere inside, she chose this. Maybe not at first. Maybe it wasn't fair. But still, she let it happen. She let him take what was mine. I left that night. I couldn't breathe under the same roof as her anymore. The weeks that followed were a blur of numbness and rage. I filed for divorce. I quit my job. I hired a lawyer who was as furious as I was and told her everything. Lawsuits were filed against Grant for harassment, blackmail, emotional damages. Emily was dragged into it too. The confrontation wasn't cinematic or dramatic. It was cold, clinical. Lawyers at tables, paperwork thicker than my arm, words exchanged like bullets. In the end, the court ruled in my favor. Grant was forced to pay a hefty settlement to avoid a public trial that would ruin him. Emily got almost nothing. It should have felt like a victory. Instead, it felt like ashes in my mouth. Money didn't fix the gaping hole in my chest. Winning didn't put the pieces of my life back together. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face the night she confessed, twisted in guilt and shame, but still the face I had loved more than anything in this world. I couldn't stay. I packed a bag, booked a flight to somewhere, anywhere, and then left. No plan. No destination in mind except away. I landed in a coastal town in southern Italy where the air smelled like salt and lemons, and the ocean stretched out so wide it made the pain inside me seem small. The first few days, I barely spoke to anyone. I wandered the cobblestone streets, sat by the harbor watching the fishing boats come and go, ate meals I barely tasted. I was a ghost in paradise. One afternoon, I wandered into a small bookshop tucked between two crumbling stone buildings. I wasn't looking for anything. I just needed to not think for a while. That's where I met her. Her name was Sophia. She was the owner's daughter, helping run the place while he recovered from surgery. She had an easy smile and eyes that looked like they had seen 1,000 heartbreaks, but still chose kindness anyway. She didn't ask me why I was there. She didn't pry. She just handed me a book, a collection of poetry in English, and said, "Sometimes it helps to borrow someone else's words when you can't find your own." I nodded, took the book, and sat in the corner for hours, reading lines about loss and healing and finding light in the ruins. I came back the next day, and the day after that. We didn't talk much at first. She would bring me coffee, recommend another book, and leave me to my silence. Slowly, I started telling her pieces of my story. Not the ugly details, but enough that she understood the grief sitting on my shoulders. She told me about her own losses, a mother she lost too young, dreams she had to put on hold, regrets that clung to her in quiet moments. We didn't try to fix each other. We didn't pretend it didn't hurt. We just sat with it together. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. There was no romance between us, no tension, no expectations, just two broken people finding a little peace in each other's company. I wasn't healed, not even close. But for the first time since my life shattered, I started to believe maybe, just maybe, it wasn't over. Maybe there was still something worth building, even if it looked nothing like what I thought it would. Maybe in the ruins I could find a different kind of home. I wasn't ready to go back yet. I didn't even know what back meant anymore. But I knew I wasn't going to be lost forever. I closed my eyes, breathing in the scent of old books and sea air, and allowed myself a small, fragile hope. It was enough. For now. The days slipped into weeks without me even noticing. Somewhere along the way, I stopped waking up with that crushing weight on my chest. The dreams still came. Memories of her, of him, of the life that slipped through my fingers like sand. But they lost their power over me. Sophia never asked for explanations. She never demanded I hurry up and heal. She gave me what no one else had since everything fell apart: space, respect, quiet companionship. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we didn't. There were afternoons when we'd sit in the courtyard behind the bookshop, sipping bitter coffee from tiny chipped cups, watching the world move around us. Sophia would tell me stories about the town, the old fishermen who still believed in sea monsters, the narrow alleys where secret lovers once left carved messages for each other, the festivals that turned the streets into rivers of music and color. She made the town come alive, even for someone like me, who had forgotten what it felt like to be part of anything. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in deep bruises of orange and purple, she invited me to a small celebration at the harbor. A fisherman's festival, she said. Something simple but beautiful. I almost said no. I wasn't ready. I didn't trust myself around laughter and dancing and life. But something in her eyes, a gentle stubbornness, made me agree. The harbor was alive that night. Lanterns swayed on strings overhead, their golden light flickering against the darkening water. Children ran barefoot through the streets, their laughter sharp and wild. The smell of roasted fish and sweet pastries filled the air. Musicians played songs that were older than memory, songs that made even the oldest villagers tap their feet. Sophia disappeared into the crowd, And for a moment, I panicked. The noise, the color, the life, it pressed in around me, suffocating. I felt the old anger, the old grief, clawing at the edges of my mind, whispering that I didn't belong here, that I would never belong anywhere again. I almost left. But then I saw her, dancing in the middle of the square, barefoot, her skirt swirling around her knees, her head thrown back in laughter. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't performing. She was just living. And somehow, it didn't hurt to watch her. It reminded me that life could still be beautiful, even after everything. That maybe I wasn't as broken as I thought. Sophia caught me looking and grinned, beckoning me to join her. I shook my head, smiling despite myself. She shrugged and kept dancing, as if it was enough that I was there at all. Later, as the crowd thinned and the music softened into background noise, we sat on the edge of the dock, our feet dangling over the water. "Why did you really come here?" she asked, her voice soft. I stared at the black water, at the reflections of the lanterns dancing across its surface. "Because I didn't know where else to go," I said finally. "Because I didn't recognize myself anymore. Because everything I loved either left me or betrayed me." She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "Sometimes, when a house burns down, you find things in the ashes you never would have seen otherwise." I didn't answer, but her words stayed with me, long after we said goodnight, and I wandered back to the small room I rented above a bakery that smelled of sugar and yeast. In the days that followed, something inside me shifted, slowly, imperceptibly. I started helping Sophia around the shop, carrying boxes, repairing shelves, translating books that tourists left behind. I found comfort in the rhythm of it, the small acts of usefulness, the simple satisfaction of fixing something with my own hands. It wasn't a grand redemption arc. It wasn't cinematic. Some days were good, some were heavy. There were mornings I woke up ready to face the day, and others where I barely had the strength to get out of bed. But I kept moving forward, inch by inch. One rainy afternoon, as I was repairing a cracked window in the shop, Sophia sat nearby, flipping through a battered notebook filled with handwritten poetry. "Have you ever written anything?" she asked suddenly. I shook my head. "I'm not good with words." "You don't have to be good," she said. "You just have to be honest." She handed me a pen and a blank page. At first, I stared at it, paralyzed. What could I possibly say that hadn't already been screamed inside my own head 1,000 times? But eventually, the words came, halting, clumsy, raw. I wrote about betrayal, about loss, about standing in the ruins of a life and realizing you didn't even know where the first brick had fallen. When I finished, I shoved the notebook back at her, embarrassed. But she just smiled, that small, knowing smile that didn't need explanations. "You're rebuilding," she said simply. I didn't know if that was true. But for the first time, I wanted it to be. The weeks stretched into months. I stopped counting how long I'd been gone. Home, or whatever that word meant, didn't call to me the way it once had. One afternoon, Sophia and I hiked to a crumbling old monastery, perched on a cliff overlooking the sea. The path was steep and rough, but the view was worth every breathless step. We sat at the edge of the world, watching the endless blue stretch out before us. "Do you ever think about going back?" she asked. I thought about the apartment that no longer felt like mine, the city streets that once held so much promise and now felt like a maze I didn't want to navigate, the memories that lived in every corner, every crack in the sidewalk. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe someday, but not because I miss it, only because I don't want it to own me anymore." She nodded, understanding more than words could say. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the rain tap against the windows, I realized something profound and terrifying. Healing wasn't about erasing the past. It wasn't about pretending it hadn't happened. It was about learning to live with the scars. I would always carry the hurt, the betrayal, the questions that would never have satisfying answers. But they didn't have to define me. They didn't have to be the end of my story. Sophia never became a love interest. She became something rarer, something purer, a friend who held my hand through the wreckage without ever asking for anything in return. And maybe that was the kind of love I needed most. One morning, as the first hints of autumn crept into the warm air, I knew it was time. Time to move forward. Not because I had healed completely. That kind of healing doesn't happen in neat, clean arcs. But because I was ready to try. Sophia hugged me tightly at the train station, tears shining in her eyes but a smile on her lips. "You're stronger than you know," she whispered. I didn't feel strong, but maybe strength wasn't about feeling invincible. Maybe it was about standing back up, even when every part of you wanted to stay down. As the train pulled away, carrying me toward a future I couldn't yet see, I pressed my forehead against the cool glass and closed my eyes. I thought of Emily, of Grant, of the life I had lost. I thought of Sophia, of late nights filled with poetry and quiet laughter. I thought of the man I used to be, the man I was becoming, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace. The road ahead would be long, hard, uncertain, but it was mine, and that was enough. For now, coming back felt like walking into a memory that didn't quite fit anymore. The city was still the same in many ways. The same sharp smell of exhaust fumes on the streets, the same impatient buzz of life in every direction. But I wasn't the same. And maybe that was the hardest part to accept. The apartment was exactly how I had left it. A snapshot of a life interrupted. The half-packed boxes in the living room, the broken coffee mug I hadn't bothered to clean up, the divorce papers still tucked into a drawer as if hiding them could somehow make it all unreal. I stood there for a long time, the weight of silence pressing down on me, wondering how I was supposed to build anything here again. But I remembered what Sophia had said. Sometimes you find things in the ashes. So I started small. I unpacked one box, then another. I threw away the things that hurt too much to look at, the photographs, the little keepsakes of a life that wasn't mine anymore. I kept a few things, not because they didn't hurt, but because pretending none of it had happened would have been another kind of lie. Some nights were harder than others. There were still moments when anger clawed at my throat, when bitterness whispered in my ear that I had been wronged and deserved better. There were nights when I woke up drenched in sweat, haunted by memories I couldn't outrun. The look on her face when I confronted her, the smug smile on his, the courtroom battles that left me feeling hollow, even in victory. But there were good days, too. Days when I could breathe without thinking about them. Days when I remembered how to laugh, really laugh, at something stupid and small. Days when I caught myself feeling almost normal. I went back to work eventually, but not at the same place. I couldn't sit in those meetings, walk those halls, breathe that poisoned air where his shadow still lingered. I found a job at a smaller firm, less prestigious, less pay, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that I was working with people who treated me like a person, not a pawn. It wasn't perfect. I wasn't perfect. I made mistakes. There were mornings when I hated getting out of bed, when I questioned every decision that led me here. But I kept moving, kept choosing to live, even when it would have been easier to numb myself and drift. Somehow that felt like its own kind of victory. I spent weekends wandering through the city, rediscovering places I had forgotten I loved. Old bookstores tucked into alleys, tiny diners with chipped tables and the best pancakes in the world. Parks, where the leaves burned gold and red in the fall. I started volunteering at a local shelter. At first, it was just something to fill the empty hours, but it became more than that. Listening to people who had lost everything, homes, families, hope, and still managed to find scraps of joy in the rubble changed me. Pain didn't make me special. It made me human. It connected me to others in ways I had never understood before. One evening, as I was handing out hot meals in the shelter's cramped kitchen, an old man with a face like crumpled paper looked me in the eye and said, "You're carrying something heavy. Let someone else help carry it sometimes." I didn't know how to answer, but I thought about his words long after I went home. For a long time, I had worn my pain like armor, convinced that letting anyone close again would only invite more betrayal, more hurt. But maybe that wasn't strength. Maybe strength was trusting that not everyone would hurt me, That some people, like Sophia, like the volunteers at the shelter, like the friends I was slowly, cautiously making again, could be safe places to land. Maybe the walls I built to protect myself were really just prisons. I decided to let a few of them crumble. One day, while cleaning out my apartment, I found an old photo tucked into a book. It was from years ago, a picture of me and Emily at a summer barbecue, smiling at the camera like we had the whole world in front of us. For a long time, I stared at it, waiting for the usual wave of anger and grief, but it didn't come. Instead, there was a strange kind of sadness, a mourning, not just for her betrayal, but for the man I used to be, the man who believed in forever without understanding how fragile it was. I put the photo in a box and tucked it away, not because I wanted to erase the past, but because it didn't need to sit out in the open anymore. It wasn't who I was now. Sometime in early spring, I got a postcard from Sophia. No words, just a photograph of the harbor at sunset, the same place where she had danced under the lanterns while I stood frozen on the edges of life. I smiled and pinned it to the fridge. It reminded me that somewhere in the world, there were people who saw me not as a failure, not as a broken man, but as someone still becoming. The bitterness didn't vanish overnight. Healing wasn't a straight line. Some days I still felt the sting of betrayal, still heard the echo of old arguments in the back of my mind. But the difference now was that I didn't live there anymore. I visited the pain like a graveyard, briefly, respectfully, and then I walked away. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, I built a new life. It wasn't the life I once dreamed of. It was smaller, quieter, more vulnerable, but it was mine. There were nights when I sat on the balcony, a cup of coffee cooling in my hands, and watched the city lights flicker like stars caught in a glass jar. I thought about the man I used to be, about the man I was now, about the man I was still learning how to become. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a failure. I felt like someone who had survived something terrible and was still standing. Someone who had been burned down to the bones and was slowly, patiently, tenderly building himself back up, not in spite of the scars, but because of them. As the city buzzed quietly beneath me and the cool air wrapped around my skin like a promise, I realized something simple and true. Joy wasn't something you found. It was something you chose again and again, even when it was hard, even when it hurt, especially then. And sitting there, alone but not lonely, broken but not beaten, I chose it. I chose life. I chose hope. I chose myself.